What's up, YouTube? It's Mr. Fett. I want to talk to you today a little bit. Excuse the baby, he's not feeling so great. So instead of doing a playing video, I want to talk today a little bit about Gibson and a little bit about the used guitar market and the kind of terms and the ideas that get thrown around. And I had an opportunity to play a bunch of different guitars, modern era guitars, as well as older guitars. And it just kind of bothers me sometimes when someone is new to looking for Gibson guitars. Maybe they think, yeah, I want to get a used guitar, save a little bit of money. People say, you know, are there good eras, bad eras? And a lot of times people will mention the Norlin era as a particularly bad time that you don't want to buy a guitar from this era. And I just want to talk about where that idea came from and why that has seemingly become common knowledge on the internet. And I want to push against that a little bit. I get that what happened here is, you know, you had the Gibson Guitar Company, what people call the Mccarty Era. In the early 60s, they were bought. Gibson was bought by a company called Norlin. They were like a cement making company, and they didn't know anything about the music industry necessarily. They wanted to get into it though, and they bought Moog Music, and so all of a sudden they had this stable of very prestigious brands, and they started making changes to the way that the company ran. One of the big changes, right, is that they opened a new plant for Gibson in Nashville because of the labor union. So they wanted to go to a state that didn't have labor unions. So they didn't want the workers to be able to collectively bargain for their rights. So they opened a new factory, and they closed down the Kalamazoo factory. By the time Juszkiewicz bought Gibson, the Kalamazoo factory was no longer, on Parsons Street, was no longer making Gibson guitars. And he had a completely non-union workforce to start with. But during that time period when production is shifting, you know, they tried to get the Nashville plant up and operating, making all the most popular guitars, so the customs and the, you know, they had a certain line of guitars that they were making, and a lot of the other things that were made in fewer quantities or special runs, a lot of those things ended up getting made in Kalamazoo because they had softer tooling, is how it's often put in a lot of books, and they were able to do things like that more readily. And they did, and they made some really, really cool guitars in this era. And they're not, you know, sometimes they're hard to find, but a lot of times, you know, if you get a good Gibson, history of Gibson guitars, like this one is by Walter Carter. There's another one, the Golden Era of Gibson guitars, although that one is really dealing with pre-Norlin era guitars. This one talks about the guitars of the Norlin era as well as the Juszkiewicz era, and there are some doozies in the Juszkiewicz era too. In the 80s, they had all sorts of crazy ideas that they were coming up with that didn't catch on. So this idea that there are no good Norlin guitars, I want to give you a couple examples of some really kick-ass guitars. Let me just start real quick. Let's talk about Firebirds for a minute. Now, Firebirds are interesting because they're not a classic 50s. They weren't released along with the Explorer and the Flying V and the Moderne, that were these trio of pointy guitars that were announced, and of course only the Flying V and the Explorer actually went into production in the 50s. But the Firebird came later, and it was designed by I think he was an auto guy, right? And definitely inspired by the automotive ideas at the time that were really popular. And it was a really cool guitar. Solid piece of mahogany, neck through body construction. The wings of the body are glued on. You've got two mini humbuckers. You've got two tones, two volumes. And you've got that angled, distinctive Firebird headstock. Very, very cool guitars. And that's a recipe for a very cool guitar, right? But there have been experiments with changing it up. And one of the ones that sometimes gets derided but that actually is just a really, really cool guitar for what it is, for what this guitar is. So, and this is kind of what I want to talk about and stress. When you're looking at older guitars, when you're looking at vintage guitars, when you're looking at Norlin era guitars, try your best to look at these instruments as being instruments and to appreciate them for the instruments that they are, not what they're not when you're comparing them to golden era 50s instruments. Because if you think that by going and spending $6,000 on an R9, on a 1959 Les Paul reissue that's made today, that somehow you're getting a 1950s model guitar, I mean, it's delusional. And why do I say that? For a number of reasons, but for the biggest reason is you're not buying old wood. You're not buying wood that was made. They're fundamentally different guitars because that wood was not grown and harvested from the same place that the wood is grown and harvested from for these 50s era guitars. It's different wood. They're different densities. They're possibly different species. Definitely just different growth times. It's a different thing. They're made in a different factory. They're made in a different state. They're made under different working conditions. They're made with different kinds of lacquer, the nitro lacquer. You wouldn't legally be able to shoot nitro the way that they shot it back then in such large quantities. Because it would be too hazardous. They're making thousands. You're talking about Gibson Historic Division, the custom shop in Nashville. They're making thousands and thousands and thousands of 1959 reissues. These are not rare instruments. They're not handcrafted instruments. Yes, there's handwork that goes into them. Yes. It's much different, though, from thinking that you're getting a guitar made in the 1950s. And I just think you really need to be thinking about who benefits from you thinking that Norlin era or any era of guitars is superior or inferior. Let's be blunt. I'll tell you who benefits. Juszkiewicz and his Harvard MBA partners benefit from you thinking that guitars before they took over the company are inferior. This is a 1982 Firebird 2 Artist Cmt, stands for curly maple top. This is a solid piece of maple. You like that one, huh, Jude? It's a cool guitar, right? Solid piece. The top, the maple top, one piece, curly maple, flamed. The whole guitar actually is maple. The back is all maple. The neck, I don't know if you'll be able to see this or not, the neck is flamed. It's 3 pieces of maple. But it's not neck through construction. It's got a maple top on top of a maple body. It also has a big ass control cavity for the electronics designed by Bob Moog. Again, Norlin had bought the Moog music, so for a short period of time, Dr. Moog was an employee of Norlin, and they asked him to design electronics for guitars. And of course, the RD Artist series was the product of that. It had a vaguely Firebird-esque shape, but it was super heavy. This one isn't light, but the RD Artists were really heavy. And let's be honest, the active electronics are great for studio use. For live use, it's not all that useful because the volume and tone knobs, the tone knobs specifically on these, they go from 0 to 5 on either side. So 5 is to 0, 0 to 5. Why? Because they're active. So when you're engaging the tone from 0, you're adding either bass or treble. And when you're turning it down, you're taking away bass or treble, depending on which tone knob you're using. What that means is that if you find a sound that you like, say you set it, you can kind of set up a sound on the neck pickup, and you can set up a sound on the bridge pickup. But that's really, once you start playing from there, when you engage either the compressor or the expander, the settings need to be adjusted again to get a good sound. And so it just makes it really complicated to use. But all that said, it's a cool guitar. I mean, especially for a studio guitar. But you know, you could rip out, if you're not using it in the studio, you know, you could, a lot of people have taken out the electronics in these and just turned them into kick-ass Firebirds, and they're just really, really cool. You know, it's a very neat thing. Is it the ideal guitar? No, I think it's an interesting idea. But you know, just look at that, man. It's a cool guitar, right? It's a cool guitar. And it's really cool to have a built-in compressor. Basically, the compressor gives you infinite sustain, is that kind of a deal. And the Compander, the Expressor and Compander, I think, it gives you a very fast attack. It kind of sharpens the attack, and it drops off. It kind of kills your sustain. And the compressor is active on the neck pickup, and the expander, Compander, whatever, is on the bridge pickup. And you can have them both on at the same time in the middle pickup position. So you can do some really cool things, and it's really interesting to use, you know, in the studio with effects and things. It's a very cool tool to have. And this was a guitar that, you know, Kalamazoo made in the waning days of the factory. You know, they were trying to come up with cool ideas to save the company, and they were really trying to put out some really cool guitars. This is a very well built, really, really cool. You know, it's got the traditional Firebird headstock. Of course, it's not like a 5, right? It's more like the 1 in that it has dot inlays and no binding on the neck. I mean, you know, it's hard to compare it to a regular Firebird because it's a completely different animal. But very, very cool guitar. And let's talk about Les Pauls, though, right? Traditional wisdom is that Norlin era Les Pauls have pancake bodies, meaning multi-piece bodies. You want to snuggle some more? Multi-piece bodies. They've got multi-piece necks. They've got 3-piece tops. The headstocks are too big. Right, all these things that you hear. Now, interestingly, none of those things, right? No one's saying that that any of those things make them sound like crap. Oh, and of course the neck tendons, right, are not long. But these are all kind of things that you can recite if you become, you know, a Gibson fanatic. You can recite these things because it's everything that gets told to you on the internet about why these guitars necessarily suck. And it's talked about as if all Norlin era guitars are like this. Well, they're not all like this. Let's look. Does that look like a pointy horn? Do you see 3 pieces, or is it a really nice book match flame? Right? Does that headstock look too big to you? Let's pull it down. Take a look at this. This is a kick-ass Les Paul. 1982 also. The waning years of the Kalamazoo factory. So Union made, and they were trying to make cool guitars. It wasn't a normal run, of course. Again, this is a dealer. This is one of the dealer runs. Before they started doing their own reissues, several dealers were asking for Les Pauls with traditional specs. And this was one of the ones that was made for a dealer called Leo's Music in Oakland, California. And they had a guy who owned a Burst, a real 59, and he had a Tokay, one of the Japanese copies, the highly regarded Japanese copies. And he took those guitars with him to Kalamazoo, and he showed them what he wanted. He wanted the carve to be right. He wanted, he wanted the pickups to be right. He wanted the neck carve to be right. He wanted the headstock to be right. He wanted the inlays to be right. You know, he wanted the binding in the cutaway. This is you sometimes hear about guitars of this era not having the proper binding in the cutaway, uniform binding. See how you can see the maple top there? I don't know if you can, but you can see how the binding doesn't completely cover the top. That's correct to vintage Les Paul enthusiasts, because that's the way the original ones were done. They didn't, and so all these little details that people wanted, you know, these dealers ordered and asked Gibson to do it, and they did, and they made these really great guitars. But here's one of the funny things. Ready to go? No, okay. You'll hear people still speak derisively because even though all these other aspects of the guitars are correct, they don't have a long neck tenon, right? Well, dude, I just hope that before anyone posts anything else about neck tenons, that you give these instruments a chance. You know, there are so many great guitars out there that were played. You know, the number of your favorite bands, the number of your favorite records that were made with these Norlin era instruments, it'd be impossible to, you know, there's a lot of great music that's been made with these instruments. Hello, you know, Boy, October, right? U2, Joshua Tree, all those records, a Norlin era 76 reissue, limited reissue, Explorer is what the Edge was playing on those records. Killer guitars, big fat neck, tar back pickups, killer guitar, killer tones. If you get a chance to play one, you know, you should grab it. And all these guitars, that Leo's Les Paul, they were only like less than 400 made. And half of them went to Japan, and half of them stayed here in the U.S. Same thing with these Firebirds, very few made. Same thing with, you know, with those Explorers. The limited edition, the limited thing is kind of, it's a little bit BS. They're called 76 reissues, but they started selling in 75 actually. And I think that the ones that were sold in 75 and 76 had just that sticker, and maybe they didn't think they were going to do more. And then they took off, and it seems like after, you know, after mid-76 or so, they started just putting an Explorer label on the back rather than the limited label. But there were still 1,000 or more, you know, maybe 2,000, whatever. But anyway, but less than they make of the Les Pauls in a single, of the 59 reissues in a single year. And that's kind of my point. Like, you're going to go out, you're going to spend $6 grand for a Les Paul when you could spend a little bit of time, you know, buy a book, spend a little bit of time researching Les Pauls. There's another guy who's written a couple great books on the Les Paul. There's 2 volumes, one on early and one on late, and they even talk about Les Paul a lot. And it's got tons of great pictures and can show you all these different eras, all these different Les Pauls that came through the eras, and there's so many cool ones. And they're rare. They're a piece of history, a piece of American history. You know, this is a very cool American company, and a lot of these guitars, a lot of these cool guitars were being made in Kalamazoo in a union factory. And you can get a very cool union-made guitar for way less than what these Harvard MBAs are trying to push these reissues on you for. And I just think you owe it to yourself as a player to give it just go in with an open mind. Look at these instruments for what they are as instruments. Don't go into them looking to try to think that you're going to recapture some magic that happened when, you know, Jimmy Page is playing at Madison Square Garden. They're not the same instruments, and you're not going to get that from a 2014 reissue with the neck glued on with hide glue, you know, or with what the 2015s are going to have more accurate plastics, you know, and this they're going to charge you an extra $1,000 for. Like, at some point, you know, we have to stop being suckers for this crap. You know, it's marketing. It's BS. And there are great guitars with short neck tenons. amazing to think, but it's true. There are great guitars that sound wonderful. You can get, I'll do a video on this guitar. You can get that tone that Pete Thorne is getting in that Yarn video. You can get that with those Tim Shaw PAFs with a nice, put a lightweight tailpiece on it. You make sure the studs are in the wood well, and it just sounds fantastic, like that thick, like a Telly on steroids, right? Everyone loves that tone because you know we hear it on Zeppelin recordings, right? It's a great tone. You can get it with these guitars. It's not rocket science, and you don't need to spend $7 grand to get a good guitar. There are tons of them out there, and you really should try to just play different guitars, see what you can find, and just think about who's selling. Everyone is selling you something, right? I mean, let's be honest, right? Do I want these guitars to go down in value? No, I want them to go up in value. Why am I parading them before you, right? Everyone on YouTube has an agenda. That's totally true. And even the people who don't say they don't, well, they want hits and they want whatever. We're all in this. We're having fun, but really, don't so easily be swayed by these marketing gimmicks. Every year something is more authentic. The Adirondack spruce bracing on the ES series guitars is somehow now magically going to make these guitars, the ES series made out of Memphis, magically make them better. Or I mean, come on, man, you're putting on the fretboard with hide glue, and that somehow is supernaturally increasing the resonance that then is coming through your amp. Or it's nonsense. And I just hope that people aren't that much of sheep that they're going to buy into this. Gibson has to fight against the used guitar market, and that's their biggest competitor. And so they're always trying to make it as if what they're doing is better than what came before, and that's the business plan. And it just isn't true, and you don't have to buy into it. And you can find very cool guitars. They're out there, and they're less than you're spending on your historic reissue, of which 3,000 were made, or more than that. Look at the 90, go to look at the 2003s. Sometimes, 2003 comes up and everyone's like, oh, is it Brazilian? Does it have Brazilian, right? Because they made like 100 of them with Brazilian. Well, you can find, if you're looking through those listings, it goes into like the 10,000s or something. I mean, they made so many of those, of that year Les Pauls. And people try to sell them and they think they're going to get, all this money. You're not. You can make offers on those guitars. They're fantastic guitars. But there's no reason why, you can't get one for way less than what people are asking for them, because they're not going to sell at the prices they're asking, because they're not rare instruments. They're all over the place. Everyone and their uncle has one of these guitars, But you know what everyone doesn't have? A Leo's Les Paul, right? Or there's all sorts of other cool ones, Spotlight Specials. There's the list, the Heritage 80s, I think they're called, and there's all sorts of cool ones, That's not to say, the reissue guitars are great instruments. They're very cool, right? This is an R6. I mean, this is a sick guitar, But all the same features as that one there, how he says the P90s, right? And it's got a Bigsby on it. But, they're great guitars. There's no doubt. I'm not saying that, I'm not hating on these instruments. But this one, I think, is a 2010. So in 2009, they did a bunch of upgrades, right? It made it more authentic. And that was supposed to make 2010s, awesome. And then, of course, they had the debacle with their wood. And so then in 2013, then they changed all these. That's when the glue and the truss rod condom came off, right? This has a truss rod condom. What does that mean? It's a plastic sheath. It has a bit of plastic around the truss rod. And you're going to tell me that somehow is making this guitar. I didn't know it had that in 2010. And then all of a sudden, by 2013, now I'm supposed to, what they'd like me to do is get rid of this guitar and get a new one without the truss rod sheath. Why? Because of marketing. it's BS. This guitar sounds killer. This is a killer guitar. This is a sick guitar. You would never need another guitar, you know. Juniors, check this out. This is another Juszkiewicz era guitar, right? Great guitar. This is a Les Paul Junior single cut. I think it's a 57 reissue with the wrap tailpiece. It's just in this finish is called TV white, right? These were very rare. The original ones, I've never even seen an original one like this, but apparently a few were made, and they did a reissue of it. But don't mistake me for saying that, you know, they're bad guitars in any way, shape, or form. That only Nora era guitars are good. No, I'm just saying that when you play a guitar, when you go to a shop, you're looking online, just don't discount things out of hand because of what someone who has an agenda and wants to get money out of your pocket is telling you. That's all. Take the instruments, look at them for what they are in their own right. And it'll make it a lot easier for you to find something that fits your budget, and that is unique to you, you know, and maybe even as a little piece of history, you know, and a very cool history. Jude's saying goodbye, so I think we're good. I think I made my point, and I'll be reviewing some of these guitars in the days to come. I just wanted to put that out there, and I hope you all are doing great. Peace.